Transmissions jammed. Proximity coverage only. Backup activated. System rebooted.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 2 of Proximity Coverage. I'm your host, Rogue Gold, and I'm so happy you could join me for the second episode of this podcast, or show. Still haven't really decided on a label, but I suppose it doesn't really matter too much. I was really pleased with how many of you tuned in and seemed entertained by the premiere episode, and so I hope this episode and future ones can carry that enthusiasm, and that I can continue to entertain you guys as well as give you a, platform to deep dive on our favorite game and some of its most iconic topics. With that said, this week marks the beginning of the normal format for these episodes that I hope to carry forward, which is where I will spend the first half of the episode giving my extensive thoughts on a community-voted topic, and then the second half will be spent answering your guys' submitted questions. We had some huge turnout for the poll I put up on what this week's topic should be, so thank you so much to everyone who voted. And the resounding winner of that topic was survival. So before we get into that, I will note that if you want to get involved with voting on future week's topics, you can do so right here on the channel in my community tab. And episode 3's main topic poll is live right now, so go and vote. Additionally, I'll remind everyone listening to send in any questions you want me to answer live on the show to me at any time, anywhere. As long as it's Division related, I want it, so please send me any and all of your questions. With that being said, survival. So to be completely honest, I really wasn't surprised at all that Survival won the topic for this first week, because I think any of us who've played Division for any amount of time know how iconic Survival is to this franchise. Even if you haven't played Division 1, you've probably seen Survival talked about on Reddit, in-game, wherever. So many people loved it, and so many people wanted it to come into the Division 2, and so far that hasn't happened. So I wanted to take a look back, see why Survival was so great, what could have been improved upon it from the first one, and then we'll talk about if it could ever come back in the future. But let's start with, I think I want to start with, why was it so loved? If you haven't played it before, even if you have, let's take a look back on why people loved this mode so much. And I think that the first, the big primary reason, at least for myself, what made it so special was the atmosphere. We all know that Division 1's atmosphere in the wintertime around Christmas, Apocalypse was super iconic and super, captivating. But I think that specifically Survival, with even more snow, more storms, blizzard, it was great. You could see like fires through the haze in the distance, and you could see all this different stuff, and there was just, gangs of all the different factions roaming around. It was super cool. And I think that primary reason is what kept people coming back to that mode. Even today, people do like survival weekends where they go in and play, and they get all these different types of people from different servers to come in and do it and have, I don't even know if tournaments go on anymore, but there's still a lot of survival activity. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to the atmosphere, which is also, like I said, why so many people love Division 1. And I think Survival just turned that to 11, and people really love that. But another reason that, I've seen a lot of people saying that I agree with is that the balance of the whole thing. The fact that the gear and weapons you got in there had such minimal stat value. Like, you had some, determination on firearms and stamina and electronics, but for the most part, it was only really relevant once you got to the high-end gear, but the importance on actual stats on gear was minimal. And I think that's why people really liked especially the PvP aspect of it. I know a lot of people say that Survival PvP was the best in the entire game, and while I don't necessarily agree, because I love the concept of being in the Dark Zone and fending off against the entire server, I understand why people love the Survival PvP, and I don't think it's bad at all. I think it was great. It just wasn't personally what got me the most excited, but it was still very fun to partake in, and I actually have a story about that I'll share later on. But yeah, I think the balance of the whole mode, the non-reliance on stats, was part of what drew people to it, because it made it a lot more about your own skill and your own gunplay, and I think that was really attractive. And that also kind of plays into what I originally kind of hoped they might do with Division 3, and I don't really know how realistic this is. But I really hope that they would consider at least making the 1 to 30 experience kind of like a solo experience, and your campaign missions are more structured and less about the open world, so that you could go through and maybe it doesn't become so much of a looter shooter until the end game, and that way the devs can focus in on the story aspect and the experience aspect of the 1 to 30, timeline and experience. And then that way they can focus heavily, or a lot more so, on the balancing and the gear and all that of the end game, because that's where people are going to spend like 90% of their time, right? So I just think that aspect overall was really great about Survival, and if they can bring something like that back for the future, it could be pretty good. Another reason that I think people loved it so much was it kind of was our best look at what I think the original concept and vision for The Division was. If you go back and watch I think it's the 2013 E3 trailer when they first showed the game, and they storm that police station in Brooklyn, and then it shows PvP at the end. It zooms out, shows all the maps that we never got. I think that some of that looting aspect, you can see him go in the building. He picks up like a water bottle. There's like some minimal gear drops that you find, but when you do find one, it seems really powerful and really cool. I feel like that entire feeling was the closest in the live game to survival. And so I think a lot of people were drew to that. And I think that if they kind of revisit that concept in the future, like I said, it could be really successful and really enticing for people to try out. But then the last reason, and I think, of course, you have to say this, that part of the reason why people loved it so much was, of course, because of the hunters. This is the first time we ever saw the hunters in game. We got a teaser at the end of the original survival trailer when they first put it out, and they were just menacing. Like the first guy you saw in the trailer, we never really got an archetype like that for them in the game. He was kind of like a heavy hunter, which that's scary to think about. But the ones we got in game, they're lethal, they're nimble, and they're just vicious. They'll, you fought hunters before, they have their axes, they have all the different types of skills, they have their EMPs, they look, badass, they're just so awesome. And part of the reason why people always bring up like, oh, well, why don't hunters feel as special or as the same as they did in survival? It's because you didn't have your builds to fight them. You had to use this scavenge gear that you could find on the map to fight the toughest enemies in the game. And I think that was why they were so, I don't know. It was just such a unique challenge, and it really got your heart pumping the same way that kind of PvP did for me in the regular Dark Zone. And so that was why I think so many people were drawn to that experience and wanted to keep playing it and to keep fighting them in that environment, because it was so, unfair, quote unquote, to yourself. And it just made it such an awesome experience. So I think the hunters, of course, deserve a ton of credit as for why survival became so iconic and so loved by so many. But along with this, I also want to talk about what I think could have been improved from the original survival experience, because I think there was a good deal that could have been improved, or not a good deal, but some two specifically very core components to the survival experience. I think if they could have been improved at some point in Division 1's life cycle, then it could have made the mode even more enticing for more people to try out. Two things were, the first one was random loot. The biggest negative to survival for me personally was that the loot was all static. Once you learned a route of, where all the best chests were, where you're going to get the most high-end materials to craft your stuff in the Dark Zone, where all the div tech was in the Dark Zone, then it became less of a experience about surviving, about finding better gear, trying to go out and get some better guns and gear to fight off against players and adds as you make your way to the extractions. And it more became about how quickly can I run through this loop that I've mapped out in my head to get the most div tech, to get the most stuff so that I can craft high-end gear once I'm in the Dark Zone, and then I can just kind of dominate from there. So once people figured that out, I think it definitely detracted from the experience. And if they could have figured out how to do it where all the chests and all the material drops and everything was random, I think it would have made the experience a lot more, dynamic, a lot more fun, and I think it would have increased the longevity of some of the replayability for those people who still haven't stuck with it to this day. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. The other thing that I think could have been improved, I don't know how many people are going to agree with me on this or think that it's a very big point to go over, is that I think it would have been cool if the weather and the storm itself of, survival is all about the storm, the blizzard. I think it would have been cool if it got worse the further in you go to the map. I understand why it didn't for the story purposes of the original survival. The storm was hitting kind of the boo in the outskirts of the city, and the helicopter was trying to fly in, but then you got taken down. And the reason why you have to then go to the Dark Zone is because it's the center of the map, and that's where the storm is the least strong, I guess, severe. And that's why you're able to get extracted there, because the helicopter is able to fly closer towards the center of Manhattan. So that's why, lore-wise and story-wise, the storm was only as bad as it was around the edges of the map. But part of the, some of the most fun experiences I've had in survival are in those first 5 to 10 minutes when you're in the outskirts and you can't see anything. You're trying to find the barrels to warm up. You're worried about players coming up on you from behind. That's some of the best, memories I have in survival. So I feel like and we'll talk about it coming back in the future, but I'll just say that for the past, if they could have made it so that part of the loop of survival was still getting better clothes the further on you go, because the storm was worsening as you get closer to the center, and you had to find better clothes, otherwise you were going to still need to use those barrels to warm up. I feel like that could have been a cool experience, and I kind of wish we could have seen that for the original survival, but I think that detracted less from the experience than the static loot drops did. So I don't think it was as bad as an offender, but I still think it could have been cool if they addressed that at some point throughout Survival's life cycle. That being said, what I want to also cover is, could we see Survival return in the future? I don't think at this point we're going to see it in Div 2 as much as people want it to return. I've said obviously many times that I don't think Division 2 has much more content coming for it in year 3. I think they're going to transition and market Division 3. So no, I don't think it's coming in Div 2. It might have been planned at one point. We covered in last episode how Julian Garrity teased it at one point for Division 2, but it never came. So I'm not really going to dwell on what happened there because I don't think it's really worth our time. But I do think it's worth talking about if we could see it in the future, more in Division 3. And I think, yes, I think that after the devs have seen how many people really wanted it to come back for Division 2, I think and hope that they've kind of realized the error of their choice to not bring it back. I think that they probably have noted how much people want it, and so I think we will see it in some capacity. And quickly, I wanted to pitch my idea that I've given before, but I'm sure some people haven't seen it, of how it could come back in a meaningful and successful way, and that is for the devs to make it a separate game and a separate experience from the central Division game, if we are talking about Division 3, and make it similar to a Warzone experience to how that is to Call of Duty. If you don't know, Warzone is the free and standalone component to Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Black Ops Cold War, and it is their standalone BR experience that uses the same guns, the same mechanics, and the same progression from the main game, just in a free and standalone client. And I think that something like that with Survival to the Division 3 could be extremely successful, extremely popular, and it could propel this franchise forward into a, further spotlight in mainstream media and gaming to a point that I think could just be astronomical. So how would they do it? Well, if they would make a standalone client kind of similar to how the Warzone thing is, then obviously anyone who wants to can download it. It's free to play. And then I would say if you don't own the main game, then probably you create your character in there. And then the only rewards maybe that you would earn from playing, if they did have some sort of mixed progression, maybe they have some sort of cosmetic reward track or something like that, just to entice you to keep playing. And then, as Warzone has done, you can create a whole cosmetic store, maybe one that's shared between Division 3 and this Survival standalone component, that you can buy these really dope outfits and gun skins and whatever, and then that way they're making revenue off of people even if they don't own the game. But then if you do own Division 3, then I think when you play Survival and you play these matches, you could earn, similar to the first game in the original Survival mode, you can earn caches that give you gear, give you different types of stuff, maybe you have different challenges to complete stuff in there. You can lay this out in your head of how they could integrate these two and make Survival a free standalone edition so that it would bring in much more people to the franchise and give them a taste of what the Division can offer. And regardless of what the mode would entail, I think that this would just bring in a wider audience, which is what I think Division needs if they want a third entry to succeed, is that they need to regain some of the trust of the old players as well as bring in a new audience, and this is the perfect way to do it. And then if they make it a battle royale, like a truer battle royale experience, I'm not saying they have to scrap the ideas that they had in the first one, where there can be more than one winner. There's PvE elements, there's crafting, there's all this different stuff. They can still have that, of course, but I think if they did make it a bit more Battle Royale-ish, like the suggestions I talked about with random loot, with the storm progressing in severity the closer you get to the center of the map, then I think you could start to see some bigger streamers and bigger, attention being put on the game, because I think everyone who's played it knows it's a very good experience. It's an iconic experience. The gameplay is good. Like I said, there's balance because stats are not really involved. And so if they made it a bit more Battle Royale-ish, kept the uniqueness and what made it great in Division 1, expanded it, maybe it gave the entire map a Div 1, but just add more players, if the new engine and the new capabilities of next gen can allow for there to be 36, 48, however many players they want to put in there on the entire map and make it a whole, complete experience, I think it could be an extremely successful, revenue source for Ubisoft, marketing tactic for the Division game. And if they put it out 2 weeks or a month before Division 3 launched, it would give people who are planning on buying the game a chance to sort of start learning the map a bit. It could give players who are not sure if they want to buy the game a chance to try out the mechanics, see if they like it. And I just think it would be a successful endeavor overall. And I really see no drawbacks or risks associated with doing it, other than, of course, the production cost. But I think it would certainly make its money back in cosmetics and overall purchases for the main game. So that's my idea for how it could come back in the future. Or maybe they'll just make it a, free update or a paid DLC for Division 3 similar to Div 1. Only time will tell, but again, that is my idea for how they could bring it back in the most successful way possible, in my opinion. All right, so that wraps up the survival segment of the show where we talk about the main topic. Definitely let me know in the comments what your guys' thoughts on survival are, about the kind of stuff that I talked about or some other components of survival. But yeah, hope that was a good deep dive on the mode and did it justice, because it's certainly a very iconic part of Division history. Now we move on to questions submitted by you guys. I just want to note that there are plenty that I have that were submitted for this week, either during week 1 or this week, and that people want answered. Some I had to save for next week's episode as well as future runs, so I apologize if yours did not get answered this week. Again, I just have a lot that I'm trying to get through, and I don't want to pack it so full that the episode turns into an hour long, so that is why. But also keep please submitting for future weeks, and they all will eventually be answered, so rest assured there. But let's get right into it. First one we have is from Craig, who actually asked in the live chat of last week's episode, do you see any chance for any more new specializations? I've said before I don't think Div 2 is getting more major content, but if it does, if we did see an expansion 2, I would hope we'd see more. Even if they do, I doubt we would, because I don't know, I just feel like their specialization concept was a prospect from the vanilla version of the game that's now kind of outdated. I don't know if they really ever had plans to do more than 6, so I don't know if we'd really see that. But I can hope, and we can hope, but probably not. Thanks, Craig. Next up, Jesse asked about, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but he was basically asking about companion dogs, which a lot of people have brought up in Division's history over the last 5 years. I think they'd be very cool to see. I do wonder if people always consider about, I think some people might get upset if, and I'm not saying I'm one of these people, but I think people in the community might be upset about the fact that you have a dog that can then come in and die with you in combat. So I wonder if they were to bring these in eventually, what Massive's compromise on that might be, and what I think could be maybe cooler than dogs just running up and trying to scratch and bite people would be if you can send your dog to go get you different consumables, right? Or different like buffs for your character. So maybe you have a little interact menu with your dog. He comes up to you, you talk to him, and then he goes out, and you can choose whether he brings you back maybe medkits or special types of ammo or different consumables. And maybe if he brings you ammo or medkits, well, obviously ammo would just be like explosive or fire bullets, but he could maybe bring you medkits that have different effects. Maybe they proc faster, or it's a quicker cooldown, or they give you more healing. And maybe they're denoted on your HUD by like a little extra symbol that it was brought to you by your dog or something like that. I feel like that could be a good compromise and a good way to do it, other than just having a combat dog with you, which wouldn't necessarily make the most sense, I would think, in the context of the Division. I mean, having a dog in a raid with you seems a little silly. But overall, the concept of having some sort of dog companion would be cool, I think, and that could be one way they could do it. So thanks for asking about that, Jesse. Next up, we have one from, I hope I don't butcher your name here, but Zenzia, who asked, should Div 3 have a supply line like in Div 1? And for those of you who don't remember what the supply line is, because I forgot and I had to ask him to clarify, it was that part of the security wing where you could actually wait and get daily clothing drops and deliveries. And yeah, I think something like that could be really cool to return. I just think in general, more ways and more clothing in general is always a good thing to be added. Div 2 had a decent pool from the start, and you could find them from just exploring and looting the open world, so that was good too. But yeah, I think some sort of thing like the supply line, it was pretty neat, right? To go every day in your base and feel like you had daily things to collect. You had that. You had, I think, materials from up in the tech wing, and there was something up in the in the medical wing, I think, and then you also had your special ammo types from the security wing. So I think bringing that aspect of the boo back, if they do reintroduce another boo in Division 3, having some sort of more interactivity and stuff you can go and collect, I think would be cool, and the supply line is certainly one way they could do that. So thanks for the question, man. Bash asks if they should bring back Insta Medkits from Div 1. And yes, I think that one of my biggest hopes for sure as far as PvP is concerned for Div 3 is that we see the return of some form of burst healing. And both in the form of skills, I hope that they reintroduce the first aid in some capacity, but also I really hope the medkits go back to being insta-cast. If they go back to a strictly health system and not have the armor, then I hope it's pretty similar to Division 1, honestly. They could even, if they want it to be more balanced, because I'm not against it being more balanced, I just really think that burst healing is needed for there to be a higher skill ceiling in PvP and for, to counter large amounts of burst damage. And so I think if they want to add a greater timing difference to it, that's fine. If they want to add a delay from when you press the button to when your character applies the heal, that's fine. If they want to add a longer animation or whatever. But yeah, I do. Overall, I really hope that they bring back Insta Med kits in some format, because I enjoyed those a lot more than I do the armor kits right now. So thank you. Next up, Shannon asks, do I prefer Division 1 or 2 and why? I was actually having this conversation with someone the other day. I'll say right up front that, of course, I prefer Division 1. That is my favorite game of all time, and Division 3 would have to do a lot of stuff right to take that crown. But while I prefer Division 1, and while it was my favorite game because of the PvP, because of the atmosphere, because of all that stuff, I think that for a regular casual gamer, this isn't really your question, but I'm just adding on to it by saying that I think for a regular casual gamer who has not played this franchise before, I think Division 2 would be a better game in their eyes, because it's more fluid, it's more polished, right? There's better animations, there's a smoother progression system and all that kind of stuff. There's more structure to the game in terms of the open world and what kind of endgame activities you can do. So I feel like in someone like that's eyes, Division 2 would probably be seen as a better overall game. But of course, to me, and I'm sure you and a lot of other people, we all prefer Division 1 and will for a very long time coming. So thanks for the question. Next up, Killshot Go Gaming asked, presuming they wrap up the Fei Lao thing this year, would you like a prequel focusing on the first wave back in the winter in NYC for the third? You say presuming they're going to wrap it up. I don't think they will. Honestly, what I've said before and what I'll make a video on in the future is that I think that the Fei storyline will be continued on into the Division 3, or at least into another expansion. So I think Division 3 will continue the story and the events that we are currently seeing unfold right now in Season 4 and in Division 2. But obviously the idea of having a prequel about the first wave has been floated for a very long time. And to give my thoughts on that briefly, I like the concept of it 100%. I think that it would be really cool to be able to see what went down then, kind of see the destruction and downfall of society. But the thing that I've raised before, the only concern, is that I think the devs might have a hard time making the game perpetually set in that 1 3-day time span. And someone said to me before, well, Division 1 is placed in the same time span, but I think it's different, because when you're placing a game during the events of society collapsing in a matter of days, I don't know how you necessarily prolong that so that it's stuck in that same day for all time. You know what I mean? That would fit more in a single player game. But for a live service game that they're continuing to add on to, I don't necessarily know how they would make it so that society is perpetually crumbling, right? So that's something to think about. But yeah, I would certainly love to see that storyline in some format, whether it's like a flashback in a future game or whatever. I don't necessarily think that's what we're getting next, but it would be cool to see nonetheless. So thanks for the question. All right, next up we had two from Daedric, who asked, I submitted a Div 3 question. How do you think the next rollout should be made as far as making the game world a global setting? Should pieces of the world be released as expansions, DLC, patch updates, etc.? And that's a great question. I've thought that, and this is regardless of where they set the next, what city the next game is in, right? Is that I've always thought that the DLC drops, even the free ones for this franchise, should be a bit more structured in terms of like what comes each patch. I think they tried with the episodes to have some sort of structure, like 2 missions and one of these, but it didn't really pan out for their year-long plan, right? I think that wherever it is, I would really love if they include some sort of open world expansion each update, and then, maybe one mode, one PvP map, however they do it. You get what I'm saying? I think that would be really nice. So as far as expanding it to the whole world, I mean, if they start off with one map and then over time they add DC in, back in, they add New York, wherever it is, they add all these other things, and they keep expanding every update, I would certainly love to see that. So yes, I agree with your sentiment there that would be cool to see. And then Daedric also asks, would you like to see exclusive exotics for either SHD or Rogue only factions, or maybe even country specific? Yeah, if they end up going with the Rogue and SHD storyline that you can choose, I would love to see some sort of exclusivity stuff between them so that there's incentive to try each path out. And whether that comes in the form of exotics or just cosmetics or whatever, I would certainly be down. So yeah, thanks for the questions, man. And I have more of yours. You know that I do. And so I'll get to those eventually. The next one we have here is from Aaron Barton, who asks, do you think the difficulty of Division 2 NPCs should be higher? Many of my friends argue that Division 1 NPCs are more difficult and that challenge makes the game more fun. I don't necessarily think that the Division 2 NPCs are dumber in any way. Like, I think the AI in Division 2 is actually much smarter than it was in Div 1. The enemies do more. There's more archetypes that interact with one another. So as far as being more difficult, I don't really think so. I think Legendary certainly has a very certain playstyle to it that I think is still challenging even to the highest amount of players. It takes time to clear a Legendary mission. And so I don't think Heroic should be brought up more to be more in line with that. I mean, certainly we have builds right now that allow you to clear that kind of content and negate some of the NPC AI a lot. And so I think the issue is more that than making the AI smarter. I mean, any AI improvement they want to make them more realistic and more combat ready overall would be great, of course. But as far as specifically making them more challenging, I don't think that's necessarily needed. No, I just think continued innovation as for what the archetypes are and what they're capable of would be my preference there. But thanks for the question. I have more of yours as well, Aaron, that I will get to eventually. All right, and then last up, we have one from Cashnix, who asks, since you've played Destiny, what are the things that you think Bungie does better, and what does Massive do better? And that's a great one. I want to end on this one because I think it's a very interesting question. I think that when you try to compare the two, and I've certainly done it in the past, I'm not going to pretend like I haven't, but while they are both in the looter-shooter category, they are very different in terms of gameplay. Obviously, Destiny is first person, Division's third. Their settings are different, futuristic in Destiny and modern in Division. And so it's hard to compare stuff like the exotics for sure. A lot of people have in the past because you can't necessarily give Division guns where it's like lightning bolts come down from the sky, right? And that kind of stuff, because that doesn't really fit with what the game is about. So I think Division 2 has done a good job with exotics, but of course I think Destiny has more variety in exotics, but that's partly because of their greater freedom they have with the setting. So I'm not going to necessarily say that. He mentioned the gunplay in his question. I think if you're comparing Division 1 to Destiny, then Destiny would have better gunplay. But I actually think the gunplay in Division 2 is really solid. And again, it's third person versus first person, so you can't really make a direct comparison. I think both are good in their own way, but obviously Destiny has some very smooth gunplay for first person gameplay. It's probably the best first person stuff on the market. So I really love that about Destiny. What I will say is I do have two distinct ones for which studio I think does each better. I think that Massive makes better worlds. If you go out into Destiny's patrol zones for each of the planets, I don't think that they're nearly as detailed or as unique or as fun to explore as the worlds in the Division are. I think that's certainly a win for Massive, and it's something that they've done really well, and I hope they continue to do in the future. But for Bungie, I think that they make really great and better than Division instanced content. So stuff like their strikes, their raids, Gambit, the Crucible maps. I think that all of Bungie and Destiny's instanced content is usually better than the Divisions. So I think that's the big comparison that I would make between the two, is that Massive makes better open worlds, better stuff to explore and all of that, and Bungie makes more streamlined, more focused, more engaging, and more exciting instance content, like the strikes, raids, Gambit, Crucible, all that stuff that I laid out. So those would be my big comparisons between the two, but that was a great question, so thank you for that one, Cashnix. With that said, guys, I think that's going to do it for episode 2 of Proximity Coverage. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I hope today's topic of survival as well as the other questions we got through were interesting. I'll give everyone a reminder that you can go vote right now on next week's central topic if you go over to my community tab, and be sure to submit any and all of your questions at any time on any platform. Just be sure you label it as something you want answered on Proximity Coverage. Thanks for your support, everyone. Let me know how I'm doing and if you're enjoying the show and its segments in the comments below. And with that said, everyone, have a wonderful day. And until next time, Rogue Guild, out.